They're done. They're finished. It is the year, and I'm going to go as far as saying they could be relegated twice within the next 5 years.
What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Planet Soccer Show here on YouTube, post week 2. I'm your host, Reed Simpson, along with Dylan Wilcox. We're 2 out of 38 games through the season. We're going to blink and it'll be May. However, we think we are getting somewhat of an idea, maybe not. Wolves is still a big question mark, but we're getting kind of an idea of the way teams are going to play. There's still some time left in the transfer window, so a lot of things can change. However, it was a very interesting week, and we'll talk about it. Interesting week in the amount of cards that we saw. Interesting week in some of the big names, big six, big seven, if you will, really disappointing again after disappointing campaigns last year. Same problems for a lot of those teams. We have a very new look Tottenham that we'll talk about. Early marquee matchup between Newcastle and Man City. I feel like y'all played really early last year too.
Yeah, we had them at
But a
home
really well
in like the
contested.
first 5 weeks or something like that last
Yeah.
year, I want to say.
Y'all drew them, right?
Yep. Yeah. One of the best matches of all year last year, biases aside.
Yeah.
Biases.
But yeah, there were a lot of good games and a lot of really bad games played this week. Dylan, as you watched the games this weekend, did anything really stick out to you?
Some of the teams for me, like you said, some of those big six, I don't even know what to define that as anymore, but those big six sides kind of let me down a little bit. Even Liverpool's 3-1 win it's a 3-1 win, but they didn't
Not
look
convincing.
great. Didn't look great doing it. Obviously, everybody's talking about Chelsea getting beat fairly handily by goal wise, fairly handily by West Ham. So for me, that was the biggest thing. Arsenal didn't look completely superb today. You look at the attacking momentum, they looked good, I guess, but like actually eye testing it, I don't think they necessarily look like dominant or anything.
I don't think they
like
looked
that.
very good at all.
So I think that's the biggest takeaway for me is those like big six: United, Arsenal, Chelsea, a lot of Liverpool, a lot of question marks around that big six, like you alluded to.
Yeah, I think the thing for me, which is the first point that we'll get into right now, there were 5 red cards this weekend, which I do not remember that happening in the 2+3-ish years that I've been watching the Premier League. We had one straight red on McAllister, which I mean, he put his spikes into the player's ankles. It was inadvertent, but that's something that Liverpool. If you're not Liverpool, that always gets called on you. So for it to get called on Liverpool is kind of refreshing, honestly.
But it is refreshing. But we saw the exact same tackle. At least I did. I was up north this weekend, so like half watching a lot of the games. I saw that at least 3 other times this week, though. Studs up into the ankles 3 other times that didn't get it. So like, yeah, it is super nice seeing Liverpool not get the benefit of the doubt from officiating. But at the same time, as much as I like hating on Liverpool and seeing them fail or get carded, I just want consistency, and I feel like we really did, especially with a lot of these red cards that we'll dive
You're
into.
never going to get consistency.
Just none.
Yeah, we're never going to get that. Emerson Royale in the North London Derby last year got sent off for pretty much the exact same challenge.
Yeah.
I think on Martinelli. But yeah, 5 reds, and a couple of them, I want to say 2 of them, maybe the second one was for arguing, or the first one was for arguing, which is something we've seen implemented this year. If there's any sort of time wasting or argument, the ref's going to pull out that yellow card. So I'm pretty concerned as a Tottenham fan because we've got lots of kind of hot-headed players, especially Christian Romero. With our center back depth, we can't afford to get him on a red. So I was just dumbfounded. I'm like, going into today, there were 4, and I was like, man, that's still a lot. And then we saw Tomiyasu get sent off in the Arsenal Palace game today, and just add another one to the tally. So it'll be interesting to see going forward if that trend continues. I don't know if they'll kind of shift it mid-season, be like, all right, this is a little extreme. Like, we don't need to see 4 teams playing a man down for 40 minutes every week. So we'll see. We'll see how they.
What you started to touch on there is something that I have a huge problem with. I really, really hope it doesn't change at this point, because 3 points in August count as much as 3 points in February. So like, yes, it might seem excessive right now, but how fair is it to Fulham, who lost Tim Ream on it wasn't a dissent yellow, but a very questionable second yellow that gave a red, and they had to play a man down. Like, how fair is it to Fulham if 3 months from now that exact same challenge doesn't get a second yellow? Like that's where that consistency comes in. I hope I don't love seeing 5 red cards in a week, but like I hope we're at least consistent with it because I don't like the 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 concept of changing because oh shoot we're wrong halfway through the year. Just like we saw last year coming out of the World Cup, we questioned is stoppage time in the Premier League going to drastically increase like we saw in the World Cup, and it didn't. But we're seeing that this year in the Prem, and I would much
Yeah.
rather that where it's consistent for a whole year, even if we're wrong or quote unquote wrong with these decisions. I at least want to see consistency. And before we started recording, you made the joke of, yeah, good luck getting consistency out of Premier League officials, and you're right, but like at its core, I hope we're at least consistent. The big thing for me on red cards, most of these being, I think we only had one straight red, McAllister's, which we already touched on. The thing for me is that I kind of wanted to get your opinion on is, do you think there's any weight on that second yellow? Do you think there's any? Do you think officials are less prone or more prone to give a second yellow? Because you look at Tim Ream and Tomiyasu's, both of their second yellows, I would argue shouldn't have been a yellow at all, but they really shouldn't have been a second yellow because it was both
Yeah,
in both
historically, that's
instances.
what I've seen. I think historically, you'll see a play, maybe a tackle in the 70th minute that would absolutely be carded in the 25th. That isn't
And
carded
I
in the
think as
70th.
a
Whether
Newcastle fan, I see Joe Linton get away with that a lot. As a guy who
yeah,
loves first half red cards, I feel like he does get away with a bit in the second half. And if we're not going to see
mhm.
that anymore, I do think that's good. Again, for consistency, I'd like to see a yellow be a yellow no matter how many cards you're on, long term, short term in the match, whatever the situation is. I want to see consistent yellows. But both of those yellows, I mean, I don't think they were yellows at all. I certainly don't think they were worthy of a second yellow where you're seeing a suspension and a team having to play down a man.
Yeah, and that's the only thing I think when I say maybe they should shift the rule at the midway point in the season, but come out and say it publicly and just do that just because injur- injuries are going to start to take a toll. And if you have injuries, then guys are missing a game for a second yellow, like Tommy Yasu's or like Tim Reams. It's just it's gonna make the quality of football worse when
You hold on. You want
these
the
guys
FA?
probably
You want the FA to come out and say, like, be public with stuff? Like that's
yeah,
just
it's
not
just
gonna
like I
happen.
want officials to be consistent. Neither
Just
of it's gonna
not
happen,
gonna
but
happen.
yeah, yeah.
No doubt.
Um, let's move on to talking about the first team. I feel like we talk about them every week, but I have a pretty profound thought about Chelsea, and it's Chelsea's America problem. And what I mean by that is let's take a look at the New York Yankees or the Los Angeles Angels. And both those teams, notorious, the Angels especially lately, signing big name players who are coming off huge 1 year. Look at Anthony Rendon. You know, they signed him for 10 years and he's been absolutely terrible. They haven't won anything with Otani, even though he's been good. The Yankees have obviously dished out hundreds of $1 million on superstar players that might be past their prime. And that's what Chelsea's starting to do. And they're starting to get away from what they've been so good at in the past. And that's building up their academy and then having their academy players excel in their system. With soccer clubs, it's such there's such a I don't want to say emphasis, but the culture of soccer clubs is so dependent on the top and top to the bottom. And I think a lot of these Chelsea academy players are realizing now, or maybe starting to realize that we're going to get to the point where we're ready to make that jump, and we're either going to have a really short leash and they're going to buy somebody in January to replace us, or we're just never going to get the opportunity in general. So I look at Chelsea and they're buy. They're just we're going to patch all of our issues with buying players, which is fine. I mean, that's as a rich club, that's what you should do. But on the flip side, I'm going to bring Brighton into this.
Yeah.
And what's the best run organization in Major League Baseball, Dylan? For the last 15 years, who's been the best?
Tampa Bay Rays,
Tampa Bay Rays,
who are Brighton.
who are Brighton. The Rays, I don't think they won a World Series. They've made it to multiple World Series since like 05. They've never really broken down that door. I assume they probably will in the next 10 years or so, maybe. But they sell their players high. And, the Yankees are going to finish behind the Rays for like the 7th time in the last 10 years this year. And that's very similar to what we're seeing with Brighton and Chelsea. And that could become a real trend because Brighton shows no signs of slowing down, and Chelsea is just such a mess. There's just no way for those players to get cohesion if you're bringing in 15, 16 players a window. Yeah, you might dump some of those contracts to Saudi Arabia, but there's a problem of cohesion there, and I see it a lot in American sports. You can get away with it in baseball because it's such an individual sport. You can probably get away with it in football because individual superstars can excel. I'd say basketball is probably the closest. We saw a time period there where super teams really always won the championship, but we're seeing that less and less now because especially in the playoffs, there's such an emphasis on defense. You have to play good team basketball, and that's similar with soccer. And Chelsea's just really having a tough time, especially on the offensive end, which is where it probably matters in soccer, whereas in basketball, it's more on the defensive end. Having that cohesion and attack is just not there for Chelsea, and it doesn't even look like it's close.
No,
So
no, it
that's my
doesn't.
thought.
One, not refuting your point necessarily, because I do think they've taken a huge emphasis on signings as opposed to the academy, which is kind of what made Chelsea so relevant for so long. But one of the big concerns I would have if I were a Chelsea fan is not only the signings, but it's the number of signings of players in the same like age bracket for me. Like they're signing a ton of those, which is an age you want to sign, that 22 to 26. But those are all young guys with very minimal high level experience. And a lot of it seems like let's throw shit at a wall, I think is the saying, and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And I think there is some validity to doing that. But in the immediate here and now, as a team who, if they're not already in financial fair play because they've been creative, will be in financial fair play concerns here shortly. I think it's going to cause a huge problem because they do need to win now. And bringing in a bunch of young players, while on the surface it seems attractive because you can spread the contracts over 8, or now that UEFA stepped in, or Premier League, I don't remember which, one of the two stepped in and said 5 years is the most you can spread out a transfer fee. It's going to catch up to them at some point. But for me, the biggest question on Chelsea is all of the money they've spent, over $1 billion US in the last 3 years, I think, over $1 billion US, and they don't have somebody that I believe could be a 20-goal scorer. Nicholas Jackson has all of the potential in the world. He looked phenomenal.
I think he will be eventually.
Eventually, yes, but like again, when 3 years from now,
Yeah.
are you going to be in a position where you can you wait 2.5 years for Nicholas Jackson to be a 20-goal scorer? I don't know if Chelsea financially is in a position they can wait for that. So that's kind of my biggest question mark around Chelsea right now is, yes, they're spending a lot of money. I do, as much as I dislike Chelsea, I do think if you're going to spend $1 billion US, I think they've done it in the last 10 months. They've done it fairly, or 8 months, whatever it is. They've done it fairly responsibly-ish now. I think they're overpaid for some guys, for sure. I think Caicedo was an obvious overpayment, but I think they're getting guys in modern football. Mudryk was Enzo. Enzo looked good.
Yeah, he was a post World Cup buy.
No, but like he's looked really, really good in the first 2 games this season. He didn't look great last year, but they've kind of freed him up with some additional midfield signings. So I think that's one that we'll look back on a year from now and say
115 million though.
But I'm willing to reserve judgment until we've seen him in a pot.
That's like a 30-goal assist player.
And I think he probably could be that if they have a midfield around him that allows him. And last year they did not have a midfield around him that allowed that. But I think this year that we could kind of see that. But at the end of the day, it does come down to goal scoring. They haven't had a 20-goal scorer in 5 years now, almost. And not that every team gets a 20-goal scorer, but if you're a big six pushing for titles and spending $1 billion over 3 years, you got to have a 20-goal scorer. And I don't know if they have that this year or next year. Again, Nicholas Jackson 3 years from now, maybe, but I don't know if they have that right now. And that's not something Pochettino can fix. You know, it's been a problem. It was a problem all of last year. They had, I think their expected goals were like 5 or 6 behind Man City last year, but they got outscored by 25, 30 goals by Man City. I think they had more, actually not I think, I know for a fact they had more expected goals than Man United, but they were outscored by 15 by Man United. And that's not a thing a manager's style is going to fix. The expected goals were there last year for them to be a top 6 side, but the production wasn't. And I don't think that they have spent enough money properly to have a guy that can just flat out finish. And that'll kind of transition into my next point. We're gonna go into Spurs and expected goals next, I think.
Yeah.
But that's a huge
Good
problem.
transition.
You outpossess West Ham by 20%. You outshoot them by 5 shots, and I just don't understand how you spend that kind of money. As good of players as they've added, I don't know how you spend that money and still have a team where I go, I don't even know if you have a 15 goal scorer this year. Sterling looked great. Jackson looked great, but I don't know if any of them, Sterling because he's past his prime, Jackson because he's younger. I don't know if they
God,
have a guy who
Sterling
can,
just does not look good at Chelsea, man.
he
At
looked good.
all.
He looked good this weekend. I will. He looked dynamic. He looked City esque, but he's not finishing. And if your
Yeah.
number one goal scorers are going to be Sterling and Jackson this year, you're not going to be in a position to finish top four. And another year of Champions League missing out on Champions League for another year for Chelsea is going to cause not only financial problems but fan problems, and it could get really ugly. So for me, that's my biggest question on Chelsea is where are these goals going to come from? Because they dominated the game against West Ham even before the red card, dominated the game, and there was just no finishing there.
Yeah, I just last point on this, then we'll move on to Tottenham, Man U. The one pushback I'll say is you can win a lot of games in this league without a 20 goal scorer. Man City's won the league multiple times with a 15 goal scorer being their top goal scorer, but they also allowed less than 12 goals that season. So Chelsea's defense, while it's good and they have an all timer in Thiago Silva and they've got good young talent, the hey buddy, the balance I just don't think is there. The firepower on the offensive end isn't there to completely balance out an above average defense, but not an elite one like we've seen win titles in the past.
I'm going to go ahead and transition us right to Spurs because I have a whole lot of thoughts on the importance of goal scoring, and it does kind of companion with Chelsea and what I was saying about 15, 20 goal scorers. So my biggest concern, I know Spurs is your topic, but I'm going to jump in right here. My biggest concern with Spurs is they don't have a goal scorer. Yes, Sonny has had goal scoring years, but he did that with Kane. I'm reserving judgment on Sonny's ability to score 15, 20 goals without Kane. But in the last 10 years, so the last decade, 85% of the teams that have qualified for Champions League had at minimum a 15 goal scorer, at minimum. So you can say, I don't know if you need a 15 or
source.
Me, Football Reference, and me. I went and I dug in research on my own. This is not from Twitter. This isn't from a video. I actually dug in and spent the time on this because I was so concerned about Chelsea's goal scoring and subsequently Spurs goal scoring. The three most recent to qualify for Champions League outside or without having a 15 goal scorer, two were Chelsea in their prime, superb defensive years. So I'm willing to say that is an outlier because their defense
Conte and Mourinho.
Their defense was that elite. And the other one is City, as you said, but that's Pep. Like that's just Pep doing Pep things. I'm willing to accept that as an outlier. And that's in the last 5 years. Only 3 teams, 2 very elite Chelsea defensive sides and 1 City team managed under Pep were able to qualify for Champions League without a 15 goal scorer. So my hot take for the week is Spurs will not make Champions League or win a trophy as long as Richarlison is their goal scorer. I know there are other goal scorers, but they're striking goal scorer. If that's where they're going to play him, I think it's going to cause a lot of problems long term. And you look at Richarlison's track record since the start of 22-23, which is when he went to Spurs. Kane was 9 times better at his goals per minute. And even Jamie Vardy was 3 times better, and Kai Havertz was 3 times better. Patrick Bamford is more of like what we're looking at here as far as goals per minute. And granted, yes, Richarlison didn't play as much last year. He was very much under Son and Kane. But even his time at Everton before that, I just haven't seen Richarlison with a track record that makes me believe he can be a 15 goal guy. And if Spurs doesn't have him as a 15 goal guy and Sonny doesn't have Kane to work off of anymore, I question if Sonny can be a 15 goal guy. So for me, that's my biggest thing with Spurs right now. I think there's a very complete team. I believe in the manager. I think they could be a very good side. It's a side I'm admittedly worried to play. I just really question if they're going to be able to take that next step back up to that top 4 and compete for a domestic cup or make the Champions League with Richarlison still as their striker. I mean, hell, in the last 2 years, Chris Wood has more goals in the Premier League than Richarlison. Chris Wood. shout out Chris
Yeah,
Wood.
I mean, Richarlison had one last year, so that
One
doesn't
right,
surprise me.
but Chris Wood, shout out him. I did not have him scoring an 85th minute winner on my 2023-2024 bingo card for the Premier League. So shout out to him. That might be a bad example. I just picked him because it was fresh in my mind, but I did look them up, and like that's crazy to me that he's outscored Richarlison, and Richarlison is kind of at the moment being asked to be the goal scorer for Spurs, and that's a huge concern for me.
So I think we need to do an episode on Tottenham so I can give you a little tactical breakdown, because I think, and this ties into my point, the XG for the Tottenham Man U game was 2.07 for Man United and 1.74 for Tottenham, which XG created has everything to do with the probability of a certain player making a certain shot.
Mm-hmm.
With the Postecoglou system, it's much more about players being in the position to score off of low XG opportunities.
Yep.
You saw both the opportunities against Man U came as kind of not accidental chances, but just as a byproduct of that Postecoglou system, getting a lot of guys in the box and just capitalizing on opportunities that were there. And with the Man U chances, you saw reliance on a lot of individuals to finish off those high XG opportunities, which obviously they didn't. So I'm not concerned about, I mean, Tottenham scored 2 in their last 2. So, they haven't put up a crooked number yet. They've played 2 really good teams so far. Brentford and Man U are both, I mean, Man U's doesn't look good now, but they're capable defensively. And then Brentford's just so solid. So we'll see. I mean, Tottenham's not done in the transfer window. They're going to get another offensive player. I really hope they get Gift Orban from Ghent. He's got 2 straight 22-goal seasons. He's a 20-year-old. He's absolutely electric. It's looking like we're going to bring in a winger if we don't bring in a striker. So I think the goals will come. They won't score 68 goals again like they did last year, but they're also probably going to allow half the goals they did last year. They allowed something like 63 goals last year. So the jury's really still out on how Tottenham will score goals, but just watching the games, they've been so dominant, especially in the box. Just they're able to find players. I don't know if you saw the Basuma pass through Casemiro's legs. Like that's so the kind of stuff they're able.
He looks he's good. It's what I expected last year when you guys signed him. He looks right. And a lot of it, I'm sure, is Conte ball really hindered him. But this is what I expected out of him. I was excited for you guys when you signed him. And I'm not trying to discount Spurs entirely, but when I see those numbers that I don't think Spurs has as much as you might like your new manager. He's not Pep, and you don't have the Chelsea defense. So I would be very impressed and very surprised if you guys are able to qualify this year, just without assuming no signings. Like you said, window's still open. If you guys are pushing for a goal scorer and go get a 20-year-old who's bagged 20 plus the last 2 seasons, that changes everything. But as it stands right now, I would be very surprised if the window closes, Richarlison is still your only real striker, you see a Champions League run. And
the fact that we're even talking about the possibility of a Champions League run for Tottenham is pretty incredible, because
absolutely.
Another option, which might even be the most likely, is you bring in somebody to play left wing and Son goes up top.
I don't like Son as a number 9 type guy.
Son is a number 9 in Postecoglou's system would be pretty good.
And maybe it is, and that's where I haven't watched enough of Postecoglou Spurs yet to really and researched his previous track record.
He's a very similar player to Kyogo, who played center forward for Celtic last year and bagged like 22, I think, in the league, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I would just be surprised what I've seen from Son so far that it would work. But again, I don't know enough about your tactics, management, all of that to know 100%. But as an outsider, non-Spurs guy, catch 10, 15 Spurs games a year, I would be pretty surprised if you guys do qualify. At bare minimum, I'm surprised if it's for Richarlison at your number 9 all season, you're not qualifying. Like, I'll just saying that right now, I don't believe in Richarlison, and I think that's your really only big problem. We joked about some stuff we saw on Twitter about the back line being a huge liability. I don't really think it is at all. I like your back line. I like your midfield, especially with Basuma and Maddison.
Fastest back line in the world, baby.
I really enjoy your midfield with Basuma and Maddison. I think Kulusevski has gotten a bad rap recently, and I expect him to perform a little bit better than he has. So, not saying it's out of the realm of possibility. I just have a hard time seeing Spurs finishing top four if they do have Richarlison leading the attack all year.
Fair enough. And, I'm not going to push back on you on that because I would agree. I'd like to see more production out of him. But I also think our midfield, Madison will probably bag 10 to 12 with 15 assists.
For sure.
I think the goals will come, but I would like to have a real
goal scorer,
poacher and pressing forward up there. All right, let's move on to some quick hitters. I don't think we have an extended conversation on many of these.
Nope.
I'll let you start with Everton, Dylan.
Yeah.
I watched a little bit of the match.
They're done. They're finished.
They're done. Is this the year it happens?
It is the year, and I'm going to go as far as saying they could be relegated twice within the next 5 years.
Wow.
And I don't mean relegated from the Prem twice. I think they could get
be a damn good League One stadium.
I think they could get relegated twice, like Sunderland-esque. And yes, I'm sure some of my biases against the two clubs and trying to find similarities, like I'll admit some of that's there. But they have nearly £400 million losses the last 3 years, which is 300 over what FA is supposed to allow. So
that's crazy.
I think first
they haven't bought anybody big
worth a damn thing. So I think, and they've sold Richarlison, and they've sold good players, and but for me, you have those kind of losses. City also had those types of losses and financial fair play questions brought up by the FA. However, City's not going to be made an example. End of the day, England wants teams in the Champions League final or winning Champions Leagues. So City's not going to be the example. But Everton seems
like expecting Kansas to get a big NCAA.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or Alabama.
But we're seeing Everton could be primed to be made that example, and they have no attacking threat. They're adding Shea Adams, allegedly, possibly, probably. But they're also going to be losing Damari Gray, who I've been high on for the last year and a half as their best attacking player. So you're telling me you're swapping Shea Adams for Damari Gray? That's not an upgrade. And granted, Dyche ball is not about scoring goals. It's about not conceding. But I don't see anything in their back line that tells me that they're going to be able to keep many clean sheets. You might be able to see Soccernomics back there. There's a whole chapter on the threat of double drop. And the reason double drops happen, why it happened to Sunderland, and they check all of those boxes for me. They've spent a lot of money. They don't have a lot of success. They're going to have to sell a whole hell of a lot if they do get dropped once. So we could very well see that turn into a double drop. Maybe not the first year, but I could very well see a double drop in the next 5 years for Everton.
Yeah, they looked really, really bad against Villa this week. Villa kind of getting back on track, albeit against Everton. The next quick hitter I think we're going to hit on is City. The City sold a lot of goals over the last 3 years. They've sold Jesus, they've sold Mahrez, they've sold Sterling. The list goes on and on. They sold Gundogan, who was their captain for most of the time he was on the field, who was a really creative, maybe not technically creative, but just he was able to create opportunities just by being a good footballer. Yeah. And what do you know? City just casually bring Phil Foden, who's been sitting in the abyss on the bench the last 2 years with a few cameos here and there. England, besides Bellingham, England's most promising player, and he came in and looked fantastic against you guys. I think he played on the wing, and interesting enough, Pep Guardiola, I think, played Alvarez as kind of that. It wasn't a double striker, but it was a little bit of a false nine, number 10 sort of deal. He kind of just shadowed Haaland a little bit, which I think that's a really good plan. If you're not going to have KDB feeding to Haaland, Alvarez is going to get a lot of attention if he gets the ball at the top of the box, and it's going to open up maybe the same amount of opportunities as KDB would just on his own. So really interesting tactic move by Pep. I wonder if he'll keep that up or if it was just a Newcastle thing. I saw a quote where Pep said, if they had played y'all just in an open, normal game, y'all would have won. I didn't watch all of it. I watched, I think, the second half maybe, but God, it's just whenever you think, okay, City they're vulnerable finally, then they're not.
Like we went into the game.
They're going to allow probably less than 11 goals this year.
We went into the game like no league. KDB, no John Stones. Like, we're out here. Like, we could go in and actually get points at the Etihad for the first time in God
Yeah.
knows how long. And yeah, I mean, we did lock down Holland really well, and they found other ways around it. Alvarez's goal was phenomenal, and Foden was every bit of the player. This was originally one of my points. I feel like he's one of the more underappreciated, not underrated, because
He
true
never plays.
true football fans know how good he is, but he's underappreciated.
Yeah.
Like, he is elite. He is a top 5 midfielder with beyond a shadow of the doubt in the Premier League, and we just don't hear his name tossed around with top 5 guys. So the fact that they just have him kind of waiting in the wings as soon as KDB goes down, like, granted, slightly different position, but as soon as he goes down, he's going to create and make as much, if not more, happen than KDB. I would almost be willing to go out on a limb and say, at this moment in time, I would rather have Phil Foden on my team than KDB, and that feels crazy, but he's that good, and KDB has been that injury prone lately. I would almost take Phil Foden over De Bruyne at this point. And
Phil Foden just moves so well, and he scans the field very similar to KDB, but his movement's much better than KDB at this point. So it's hard to say that maybe the best midfielder in the world is replaceable right now, but
if he
Phil
is,
Foden's
it's
got
by
a really
Phil
good
Foden.
shot to do it.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And Kovacic has also looked fantastic for City, which I was kind of skeptical about that signing.
See, I always liked that signing. I was super. It just felt like a guy that was going to work really well in a Pep system, and he has looked really solid the first 2 matches.
And Rodri just still fantastic.
Rodri. So, he's going to play 75 games this year and look sound as hell every single game.
Yeah. Dylan, did you have another hitter that you wanted to talk about? Elise?
Yeah, just super quick. I think it's just general idea, comment on the whole Elise situation. The fact that he turned
really
down
a lot of Palace's guys were kind of up in the air, but they look decent today, and if they keep them all,
I mean, if you can keep Elise and Eze, I would argue. Actually, it's not even really an argument. I think a lot of people would say they were more valuable this window than